You are about to learn the most important teaching strategy that's aligned with our new teacher workshop, Essential Understanding and Essential Question. It is called Think Aloud. Think Aloud is not hard to describe. It is simply about teachers thinking out loud for their students. If this is a new strategy for you, great. You will learn it very well from this workshop. If you have learned this strategy before, we want you to have an open mind, as Think Aloud is one of the most complex strategies that will require a lifelong to learn. You will find that this workshop will sharpen your thinking and practice. Take a look at this description. You can read and highlight or add some notes to your note-taking sheets. Basically, this is about a teacher describes his or her thinking in first person when she or he performs a complex process. The person describes the decisions are made, problems that came up, or solutions that they found, but they do not ask the students to answer or participate during that time. And that why it is so important to use Think Aloud. First of all, we all heard comments like, "Oh, my kids are not thinking today. It must be the hormone. They can't focus on their thinking," or "some of my kids are so far ahead and others do not even know the basics. How do I get them to think at all high levels all the time?" Well, there's truth to all of those comments, but that's why you need to think aloud. Let me elaborate a little more. Some of us learn how to think without being taught, and once we know, those processes are invisible to others, and you have to help your kids to see the invisibles. You help your students to be aware of his or her own thinking, because that's what thinking skills is about. And you also have to give your students some kind of pattern, something that templates they can hug onto, they can hang on to help them to scaffold thinking. And you also want to make sure that once students learn, they apply this thinking so they're ready for the future. They can transfer their thinking. And this is especially very important that if you want all students to be successful, because some kids will not self-teach or self-develop those skills. And you have to have all kids to have the opportunity to learn and apply and to firm up their abilities to think. So, you heard about what that is and also why. The rest is about how. We will introduce the moves of Think Aloud to you. Moves are the nuances that make a teaching strategy effective. Many people might say, "I use Think Aloud all the time." I challenge you that thinking once you know and understand what moves are. These moves needed to be followed very tightly, because otherwise you might be doing Think Aloud and you think you're doing that, but the students may not benefit from it fully. Think Aloud is a form of explicit instruction. It's very much like what Douglas Fisher said, the gradual release model. Take a look. It just starts with I do it, and then we do it, and we do it together, and you do it alone eventually. In the Think Aloud, you just have to make sure you think about the do part. What you do is all about thinking and a complex thinking, not about any procedures or facts or any other lower level work. In other words, in Think Aloud, you teach students some complex thinking, and then you use this gradual release model to ensure all students learn. Here are the moves. The red part are the actual Think Aloud moves. I simply added prior knowledge in closure because they're just best practice. The moves are actually pretty simple. First you tell, what is it? What is it you want to model? But the key is to be very explicit. For example, you might say, I'm going to model how I cite evidence from texts and why I cite them. And then you have to tell why you do this. Don't skip this one. This is the nuance you want to keep. For example, you might say, well, it helps me to formulate credible argument. And you have to be able to do that in order to convince your audience with this credible information. So then you do it, you model your thinking that time. During the stage, you don't ask for students' input or participation. That's another nuance, okay? You review your thinking, you say, well, I did this or that because. So you have to review why you make those decisions, why you solve that problem that way. Then we do it. During the stage, you might give a different piece of text for the entire group to practice that with you. You do it together. Then you do it together. This is the part you put kids into groups so they can process their thinking with each other's support. See, learning is social, especially when you talk about complex thinking. You want kids to have time to digest that with each other. And that's another nuance. You don't want to skip that. And finally, you have to make sure all kids will be able to transfer learning, not just in groups. So you give a different but similar task to students and so they can practice alone. But the most important part of nuance is that during this we do it, and you do along all of those stages, you have to think about the task you ask them to do. You have to give them a task that is not only about doing the job, but also metacognize. That's what Think Aloud is about. So you need to ask them for their thinking and the rationalization, why they make the decision, and that has to be designed in the task. So the most important thing is keep this circle. That's right in here. Think Aloud must be for complex thinking. It must be something that is worth to think aloud about. So let me repeat one more time. There are quite a few nuances. One, you have to be explicit tell, and you must share why. It has to be genuine with your kids. When you model, you use I statements. You don't ask for students' participation at that time. The task must be designed for complex metacognition, not just retrieving information or carrying out the task. It must be worth their time to think about, and you cannot skip any of these stages. Finally, let me provide a closure to bracket our learning. You might wonder, how does Think Aloud connect to our last workshop? Here they are. See, Think Aloud is about higher level thinking. So when you design a unit or design a task, you must ask, what am I engaging my kids to? Why this is worth learning? Does it move my kids to a higher level as a learner? See, that's the backwards design. You have to think about that ahead of time. If you did a good job selecting what needed to think aloud about, it must be aligned with your essential understanding and essential question. If not, you're probably not standard aligned. So after each great Think Aloud lesson, go back to your essential question and ask the students, does this lesson help you to answer that essential question? Help your kids to see the connection to this particular learning. Learning targets. You learn how to write clear learning targets. We mentioned last time, when you write your learning targets, watch the cognitive level. Do you consciously push students toward higher level thinking? Is your learning target always about list something, identify, tell, or discuss? If they are, then you don't need to think aloud. So, learning to write very good learning targets, then back it up with the think aloud strategy is like hand and glove. One goes with the other. Finally, check for understanding. During the we do it and you do it and you do it along all of those stages, teachers must be conscious about what students are doing. You walk around, you listen to students' discussion, you take notes, you gather evidence from the group discussion and also from independent work. You see if they are learning what you want them to learn. Is there any misconceptions? Are they thinking deep enough? Is there a need for reteaching or remodeling? Do they need more peer conversation? Do they need to engage in peer review and peer assessments? See, you assess all the time during a Think Aloud lesson. Well, this is the end of the Think Aloud presentation. Thanks for your attention.